My name is Suraj Dar, and I will be presenting the Charged Tapes Lab for Physics 2212. So in this lab, I will be going over 6 sections, beginning with the introduction. Next, I will go over the key assumptions, the data and measurements recorded, and the calculations performed. Finally, I will display the computational model of the charged tapes using GlowScript, and then answer some final questions about the experiment. Here in the introduction, we want to determine how much excess charge is on one piece of charged tape. To do this, we need to assume the tape acts as a point charge. And the procedure involves holding the charged tape near the other charged tape until it floats, which occurs when the force of gravity is equal to the electric force. So some of the principles we will use include Coulomb's law in order to calculate the electric force. And we will also use Newton's second and third laws to calculate the force of gravity and to assume equal and opposite effects of the electric and gravitational forces. And here's a brief description of the results of the lab, which will be covered further in the upcoming slides. So this lab required some major assumptions to be made. One of them is to ignore air resistance on a moving object, because it will likely be negligible due to the location of where the experiment is occurring. Another is to treat a long tape as if it were a point charge, with all the charge concentrated at the center of the tape, so that Coulomb's law can be applied to the experiment. Finally, we are going to assume that each U-tape made had about the same amount of charge, evenly distributed along the length of the tape. So now, we will look at the data and measurements performed in the lab. The length of one piece of tape is 0.2 meters, and given that the mass of clear tape is around 1 gram per meter, we can calculate the mass of one piece of tape to be 0.0002 kilograms. The distance between the two tapes is approximately 0.028 meters, which was calculated after averaging the results of 3 trials. In order to calculate the gravitational force, I simply multiplied the mass of the tape by the gravitational constant to get 0.00196 newtons. And since the electric force must balance with the gravitational force to make the tape float, the electric force is also equal to 0.00196 newtons. So now we're going to look over some calculations that I made when calculating the charge on the tape. And in order to do that, I knew that the gravitational force must equal the electric force in order for the tape to float. Also, the 2 point charges representing the tapes are equal because the charges are ripped from the other tape. That led me to the equation shown, and calculating for Q in that equation led to a calculation of the magnitude of the charge on one piece of tape to be 1.31 times 10 to the power negative 8 coulombs. Next, I calculated the number of electrons on the tape, which is equal to the charge on the tape divided by the charge on one electron. This is the equation Q divided by E, which led to the result of 8.17 times 10 to the power 10 electrons in excess. Then I calculated the number of atoms on the tape, which is equal to the area of the tape divided by the area of an atom, which led me to the result of 4 times 10 to the power 17 atoms. Finally, I calculated the ratio of electrons to atoms, which is the number of electrons on the tape divided by the number of atoms on the tape, which led to the result 2.04 times 10 to the power negative 7 electrons to one atom. So now let's look at my GlowScript model of the lab to get a better idea of what's happening. The model on the right shows tape A and tape B as point charges. Tape A is shown as a green sphere, and tape B is shown as a blue sphere. The blue arrow pointing upwards is the electric force acting on tape B, while the green arrow pointing downwards shows the gravitational force acting on tape B. It's actually a red arrow. My model also displays the charge on the tape along with the number of electrons on the tape. So finally, let's go over some final questions about the experiment. What if electrons had positive charge and protons had negative charge? What would change about the observations I made with my tapes and other charged objects? And Nothing observed about the interactions would change. Like charges would still repel and opposite charges would still attract. This is because despite the electrons and protons switching charges, they still have the same effect on each other. And finally, why is it important to handle the charge tapes as little as possible? What happens when the charge tapes come into contact with our hands or other objects? And handling the tapes this way is important in keeping the tapes as positively charged as possible. When the charge tapes touch other objects, the tapes begin to neutralize, and the charge on the tapes is dissipated in order to balance with the charge on the object. Thank you, and I will see you at the next lab.